Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar production, and we're going to be talking about our lovely digital underbelly and the cloud, and how we got to get smart about this or we're never going to scale our businesses. So I look forward to spending some time with you. My name's Phil First, I'm the CEO at HfS Research. There we go. And I'd love to get my esteemed peers today to introduce themselves as well. So we'll start from left to right. So my colleague, Jamie Snowden.
Oh, hi, Phil. Yep, I'm Jamie Snowden, and I've got a number of hats at HfS. So one of my primary roles is to look after HfS's data products. So I have a team focused on looking at contract activity, looking at the pricing in the market. Plus, I run a lot of the survey work for HfS. But my other role, and probably the primary reason why I'm here on the call today, is I also manage the IT services research for HfS, and I work with Ollie and the rest of my team. And I personally spent a number of years analysing the infrastructure management market and cloud as part of that, particularly as an old school outsourcing managed services analyst. So my perspective on cloud is really from the enterprise down.
Thank you, Jamie. And Ashok Balasubramaniam from Syntel. How do you do, Ashok?
Good. Thank you, Phil. This is Ashok Balasubramaniam, Vice President with Syntel. I manage our services transformation business, includes technologies like cloud. Been working in the cloud industry for about 10 years now, and glad to be on the panel.
Thank you, Ashok. And Tim Jenkins from Independent Health. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning. Thanks, Phil. Tim Jenkins from Independent Health. I work as our lead enterprise architect. I manage a small team here that's responsible for aligning business objectives with technology, and one of those areas includes our cloud strategy.
Thanks, Tim. And then finally, Ollie O'Donoghue at HfS.
Hi, Phil. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Ollie O'Donoghue. I'm a research director here at HfS, and I have the pleasure of working with Jamie as part of the IT services team. Prior to that, I spent a lot of time covering the IT service management space, and was an IT practitioner myself straight out of university. So always happy to talk IT and cloud.
Thank you. Excellent. So without further ado, we're going to talk a bit about the digital underbelly and the state of the market. And one of the fun things we do at HfS is we look at something we call digital operations, and when we look at this, the worlds of software, business operations and services have always traditionally been chasms apart. Different mindsets, vernaculars, conversations, ideas of what constitute value, and lots of different cultures. And in the past, software people never quite understood the operations folks or the infrastructure folks, and vice versa. Each thought they were, top of the food chain. But I think in the last couple of years, we've really seen a coming together of these diverse groups of people to rethink completely how we run global operations in this digital era. And one thing is abundantly clear. I think the outsourcing phenomenon, which gripped the Global 2000 over the past decade, is really making way for a genuine industry in which we're all playing a part. An industry where we've got no choice but to develop learning programs, sustainable business strategies, and make real actionable investments in order to keep our businesses competitive. And what's most fascinating are the new conversations that are really evolving to bridge this divide between the technologists and the business operators, like the one we're going to have today. So suddenly we're talking a lot more about business logic, data sets, redesigning processes with genuine business outcomes in mind. We're talking about deep learning AI systems that store what has been learned in the past, take notes of how variables and results have changed under different scenarios, and then we can make decisions based on that. So the narrative has radically changed, and the focus is now firmly on sort of bringing together all the components that can take us into this promised land of what we term at HfS digital operations. And I'd like to sort of talk briefly about the HfS OneOffice framework, which really does frame up today's conversation. And here you can see what we term as the customer-centric digital organization, where a lot of the decisions are made around how to interact with clients, how to develop interactive technologies that are personalized to help clients get tailored products and services for themselves. And we really believe that a true digital business really can't succeed without unifying the front, middle, and back offices. And traditional approaches in the past have failed to have a purpose beyond incremental efficiency and productivity. So this digital OneOffice framework is the organizational end state to really survive and succeed. And everybody wants to be a digital organization today, but the true definition of digital is being able to respond to the needs of the customers as and when those needs happen. So you need to have a data underbelly, an infrastructure that can support that. And then as we move into sort of the next phase of digital, it's not just about responding to customers, it's about anticipating their needs. And doing that, we need to leverage better analytics and better technologies to do so. But we look at something, we term the digital underbelly, which has got to be scalable, it's got to automate, digitize, and cloudify in a secure fashion. And every siloed data set, when you think about it, really restricts the analytics insight that makes process owners strategic contributors to the business. You really can't create any value, or you can't transform any type of business operation without converged real-time data. So digitally driven organizations really have to create this digital underbelly to support the front office by automating manual processes, digitizing manual documents to create converged data sets, and embrace the cloud in a way that enables genuine scalability and security for a digital organization. So companies today simply cannot be effective with a digital strategy without automating processes intelligently and building a cloud infrastructure that can really take their business sort of into the next era. And it's almost like a central nervous system where you can incept and process all the elements necessary to sort of make the organizational function. And then we understand how our people can create that autonomous capability where you sort of break down those barriers between the front and back offices to really have that digital mindset, to unify outcomes, to incorporate methodologies like lean and design thinking into their organizations, to really wrap everything they do around the needs of the customer, and then ultimately become more predictive as an organization. This OneOffice, it's not just about collecting and archiving historical data to discover what went wrong. It's about being able to predict and anticipate when things will go wrong and devise smart strategies to get ahead of them. So the digital OneOffice is all about embedding smart cognitive applications into process change and workflows. It's about learning from mistakes and new experiences along the way. And this is like the organizational neural system. And this is where we're going. And as we look out into the future, I think we have to think about being collaborative, unified with everything we do, much more intelligent, dynamic, responsive, and simplified. And before I hand off to my colleagues, I think I'd like to leave you with one statement, which is we're seeing this unification of digital business models where intelligent automation, analytics, and creative talent is really happening right now, right here. The future of work isn't tomorrow, it is today, it is in the present. But this is only made possible if you've really built a hyper-scalable and secure digital underbelly. And I'd like to hand off to Ollie, who's going to talk through the state of the cloud marketplace.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so hi everyone. I think what I wanted to do is just give kind of a brief overview of what the cloud market's doing just before we dig into the details of this webinar. I mean, Phil's kind of hit the nail on the head by covering some of those aspects of the digital underbelly, and really cloud plays a vital role. And I think often in a lot of engagements we talk about the really glamorous stuff, but we don't talk about that really important cloud aspect. So part of what we've done in breaking apart the market is to separate what we're calling OneOffice. This is the kind of the as a service cloud offerings and the traditional stuff, so the traditional infrastructure engagements. And what we're seeing is traditional infrastructure, effectively in free fall. Its market share is diving completely. I mean, we anticipate by 2020 those OneOffice as a service cloud areas of the market to overtake traditional infrastructure entirely, which is quite significant. The traditional infrastructure space, you know, is a really big piece of the market. It used to be the bread and butter of the IT outsourcing industry. So this is a really big change, and I think part of what's driving that is this new this new enterprise demand for cloud, this increase in exponential growth in demand for cloud as part of that digital underbelly. So here we have some data. It's sort of fresh off the presses, really. It was published in April 2018. It took a look at some of the investment focuses that C-level executives have in IT. And cloud's right at the top there. So 44% of organizations see that as a significant investment for the future. And it only got pipped to the post by RPA, which is sort of the go-to investment technology now. So that says something about the value organizations are seeing with cloud. And if we look down that list, we can see some of the technologies that kind of hit the headlines. So blockchain, automation. A lot of these technologies are only successful if you have that solid digital underbelly, that processing and storage capability that comes with cloud. So we're seeing a huge shift in the market and a huge shift in demand, which kind of puts cloud as one of the go-to technologies, the necessary technologies for the modern enterprise. But to give us a kind of a little bit of a fresh perspective, I'll hand over to my colleague Jamie, who's kind of got some interesting bits and pieces to talk about.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ollie. I mean, the trouble with doing any presentation around cloud, particularly drivers to cloud, is it's linked to digital, and you know, the success or failure of cloud is really linked to the success or failure of digital and the wave of transformation that's going on in business today. So this chart shows again the same survey that Ollie showed, and it shows kind of the high level of change that's going on now to companies' operations that's been driven by digital. So we've experienced, or over the last sort of 12 months, people are saying that they've experienced around, 48% of them have experienced either a significant or existential change to their operating models due to digital. And we've seen, an expectation that this is actually going to rise over the next couple of years, so up to 58% of the companies that we surveyed. And the question here is how are people dealing with this change? And I think so the last chart that Ollie shows is kind of the answer to that, or at least part of the answer to that. So this is where the focus of kind of operational transformational dollars is going. It's, we saw that kind of RPA was taking some of that, but as Ollie said, it's almost the kind of the hype du jour. But I think the good news, at least from a from a core IT services analyst like myself, is that we're actually seeing cloud actually become kind of, it was very important 4 or 5 years ago, but it's now seen a resurgence in its its importance, not just as a a driver of IT change. This is actually business people that answered these questions. So it's number 2 in their agenda, at least in terms of what they're looking to invest in to make their operations better and more future-proof against this kind of background of large amounts of change going on in the world. So if we move to the next slide, as I said, we can't really talk about cloud without talking about digital, and this is kind of our view of of the maturity within digital and how it's progressing. And at its core, I think digital is really about speed, and that's manifested itself in lots of different ways as digital as a phenomenon has matured. So originally, if you look at that kind of that single speed sort of digital 1.0 version, it was really about the speed in which you're able to respond to clients. So it's being able to deliver fast responses, and it's also about kind of as we move further down, it's more about kind of the integration of the underlying processes to be able to get the information back to the customers in a better, more concise way. So broadly speaking, we see the kind of the layers of maturity in these ways. So, you know, the first wave of digital transformation was driven by the need to transact digitally. So, you know, the big operational imperative there was speed to response, but also the speed of transactional information flow and the provision of information to customers, you know, in the absence of a physical relationship. Then we move on to kind of the next wave of digital, and that's really around kind of speed to insight and also speed to market. So, you know, the organizational imperatives that come to play for kind of that multi-speed digital organization is really that speed to insight and as I said, the speed to market, where the collection of data within the organization has helped to inform better decision making, you know, both at a macro level and also at a micro level. So we're seeing, you know, macro decisions around the strategic direction of whole parts of the company changing because of this, but also micro decisions, so fueling a, you know, the analysis of a, you know, very specific price or whatever it might be. And as we move out to the end, we see kind of you know, the what we're calling the automatic speeds. And this is where all the elements start to get brought together. So digital shifts into automatic. The challenge is about, you know, building an operating model that reacts to to change more quickly, is more agile. It's about how fast organizations can react to the disruption that we just saw, but also drive some disruption themselves in a, you know, in a more industrial way. So if we move to the next slide, and I think this was just an example that that I wanted to share around the kind of the way in which maturity has worked within, you know, at least within Digital 1.0, and you know, what we've got here is you know, a number of brands from the food delivery service area. And this example is from the UK, but I think you know, with the exception of one of these, I think most people will recognise the brands and be fairly familiar. So kind of the level one kind of digital really was around, you know, the purchase was done online and the buyer is provided with, you know, relatively superficial information about the purchase, and there really isn't a lot of live data. You know, so the example here is actually my local restaurant has an app that you can order food and you can get a delivery time, but the time is not always the same, but the time is always the same, I should say, and there's no variation. You don't get any feedback, and you don't know. It's great, and they generally deliver about right, but there's no real-time version. Or the app Just Eat, so you get a lot of choice from a lot of restaurants, but again, no live data on where the you know, where they are in the process. And with level two, you know, I've used Domino's as the example here, and you know, you do the purchase online, and you get some credible real-time information. So the meal is being cooked, the driver is out for delivery, but you know, you don't know where they are. So it gives you, you know, a fair amount. It kind of, it reaches that level two part of it. And level three is really where the purchase is done online. And you get real-time information similar to Domino's, but with, you know, these two examples, so Deliveroo and Uber Eats, you actually can see exactly where they are in the process. So, you know, you can see the driver kind of coming down the road to your address, and if we look, so I haven't got it on here, which is a level 4, and really level 4 is where you shift into that kind of multi-speed, because what you need is you know, better prediction on the delivery times, better recommendations. It needs to you know, it needs to be able to anticipate what's going on in the market better, and that's really where, you know, you see kind of the other aspects of you know, of the platform that it's operating on kind of kick into play. And you know, this is really where you know, the market really shifts into that kind of next level of maturity, and this is where I bring the discussion back to the cloud. And I think the, you know, the big shift generated by cloud, and why it's so important for digital is really not so much about the technology, although that does play a part. It's really about the commercial model and the strategic possibilities that cloud gives you. So cloud and as a service types of contract have made a kind of, have had quite a substantial change to the IT infrastructure management services market. So they've kind of meant that more consumption based and transaction modeling is pretty much the norm. But we also see that infrastructure spending more directly associated with the application that it's being running. So breaking the horizontal kind of application management and infrastructure management silos, and this means that you can actually get kind of investment and effort focused more directly onto particularly a software driven business initiative, or the software that enables that business initiative. So again, it makes it a much more commercial, or brings it back to a more business message for IT, and this is where we start to see the twist in the cloud tail, and really it's the unit being consumed will start not to be an IT measure. So the unit of consumption will start to be linked more directly to some kind of business metric, so not an outcome per se, because in that sense. But for example, we use all of the costs associated with hiring a bike from one of these citywide hire schemes could be paid for in bike hire units. So the provider only gets paid, so the IT service provider only gets paid when a bike is hired, irrespective of the technology that's consumed. And this is a simple example, but we see this enabling more use of automation technologies and AI within IT, and within transaction management, which will reduce kind of the idle cost of an IT process, which changes the commercial relationship, and it means the cost of keeping the IT running could become negligible if there was no use. And this means that the risk reward in the traditional sense that the IT firm carries is lowered, and means that it will change the commercial model, or at least how you can enable so it brings about new thinking in terms of the way in which a company can use IT and use IT to support new initiatives. So with that, I'll hand back over to Phil to kick off the discussion part of the webinar.
Hi everyone. So it looks like we're having a bit of a technical issue there with Phil, but I can jump in. So I mean, I think one of the first things that we're keen to get to know is the specific cloud journey of independent health. So Tim, could you give us a bit of background, I guess, on what your driving motivations were to jump to the cloud? We've sort of had a bit of an overview of what the market's up to, and Jamie's kind of given us a really good view of the horizon, but it'd be interesting to see how your enterprise moved forward and kind of what drove them to the cloud.
Sure. So one of the capabilities we're looking for is to be more flexible and nimble with our software and application delivery life cycles, enable things such as DevOps, automation everywhere, more scripting, and allow us to provision and tear down environments quickly, more infrastructure as a code, and remove project bottlenecks. Right now we're limited to a certain number of environments on premise. It's costly to keep those environments running with the software running on them. And then some other areas are we're looking to mitigate risk in our lower environments with our current processes to have production data in the lower environments, and we see the cloud as a way to enable that and have more of a test data capability that masks that data in those lower environments. And then there's usual drivers like move from CapEx to OpEx, migrate away from our legacy architectures, enable DR, and get better at our recovery point objectives and recovery time objectives, and lower administrative overhead that we spend a lot of time on right now, keeping systems patched and upgraded. And then overall, just look to leverage as much as possible as a service in the cloud capabilities that are out there.
Hey, and thanks, Tim. So as Phil here had a technical issue just before. It's called mute button. But yeah, what particular business requirements needed to be considered when you went into the cloud, Tim?
Well, one of them is protecting the data that's there and ensuring that those environments are secure given the sensitivity around our customers' information. Other things are just in considering overall, as we digitize our abilities to interact with our customers, modernizing the current capabilities and being current and be able to be competitive. And then also increasing resiliency with those environments more so than we have on-premise here today. And then also for the business, given the capability to more self-serve and have less dependency on IT. Some of the projects we've worked in the past, making simple changes are very costly and require a statement of works, for example, to make changes. So we see some of the modern capabilities out there enabling that self-service for them.
Thanks, Tim. And just a reminder to people listening in, if you look in your right-hand side of your screen, there's an opportunity to pose any questions that you want to make as well to myself or our other panelists. So do fire them in, and we'll try and answer them as we go through today's session. But let's move on to Ashok Balasubramanian from Syntel. I'd love to hear, Ashok, what you're seeing different in cloud adoption engagements. How did Syntel adapt to meet the needs of the client?
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. Great question. So what you're seeing, cloud itself kind of evolved over the last decade or so. So personally, we've seen about 3 large pivots. I think if you look at anywhere 5 years ago, cloud was more seen as a cost game, where someone said, hey, you could move on to the cloud, reduce your expenses, and then you had colo, hosting, and then came IaaS. So that was the first pivot on what cloud did differently. And then as there was good adoption, I think as far as till even early this year, last year, focus came on to the speed game, the speed to market. So you kind of saw a lot of focus around PaaS, SaaS, and how quickly you could create, applications, time to market. Interestingly, over the last 18 months, we've started seeing, this multi-cloud, where we're seeing everything on functions around AI, data, everything going to the cloud. And you beautifully explained it as the digital underbelly on, how you look at it as a digital office. So I think if you look at context today, I think what is so different in cloud adoption, I think all enterprises and all providers supporting those enterprises need to look away from cloud as a technology migration strategy and look at it as a digital OneOffice strategy. So don't look at it to say, I need to move X workloads to the cloud, but work with enterprises to see what does the new enterprise be reimagined on technologies like cloud. That's how I would put it.
Excellent. And often people talk about cloud migration like it's a one-size-fits-all engagement, but how have you tailored these services to meet specific needs of enterprises? And here we're talking about the healthcare industry. So what type of approaches have you made for that, Ashok?
Absolutely. I think that flows from the earlier one. I think, like you said, it's not do I migrate one virtual machine or million virtual machines. I think if you look at it that way, I think that's where this one size fits all or one cookie cutter fits all kind of came in. But if you flip it around and say, hey, reimagine the digital OneOffice and what does your enterprise mean in this digital world, I think if we take that view, a lot of things become very customized to every industry and so much specific to every customer on how they operate in the digital world. So what we've gone about doing is start with a clear digital business transformation roadmap. We call it MARC, which is an accelerated roadmap approach, which essentially tells us based on each industry context and each customer context. Like for example, Tim talked about how is resiliency important from a disaster recovery perspective, how is cost optimization important, how is self-service important for some of the customers and end users. So I think that becomes the first part. So if you really look at a tailored roadmap that says what does cloud mean to a certain line of business? Is it a highly scalable environment? Is it global collaboration? And for some, in terms of storage, it could just mean cheap infrastructure. So I think once that is set in motion, then we typically see, three large things coming out of a cloud engagement. I think first is taking care of what we call as the legacy or brownfield. Take some of the legacy, use a high degree of automation, and then enable them to adopt different types of cloud. Could be PaaS, could be cloud functions in certain scenarios. So that's one large chunk. Second large chunk focuses around what we call as greenfield. How do you go about enabling from a culture shift perspective? How do you enable people to play around with labs, work in dojo models, help them adapt to the new culture, leading on to DevOps, right? So how do you build in the new model? How do you have requirements in the morning? How do you go live in the evening? To the new model of support. How do applications never go down? How does infrastructure never goes down? So that's the large paradigm that's moving in, and very specific to healthcare, and Tim covered some of it as well. I think first thing is to get to a certified cloud, and in this example, it was AWS, which was already certified from a healthcare perspective. And from an infra perspective, security architecture becomes critical. How do you define the network architecture? Then most critical part becomes the data strategy. How do you mask the PHI data? And then in all good transformation starts with lower environments, then drive predictability towards what it happens, and then drive results. So if you look at what we've been able to deliver, I think critical thing is the industry cloud blueprints in terms of what does it mean to healthcare, what does it mean to a capital markets, and through combination of automation and rule extraction, we kind of do it through what we call as zero loss of functionality. And through automation, we've been able to achieve higher SME effort reduction, zero functional loss, and faster migration.
Thank you, Ashok. And this gets us to the point on do clients need specialized support and help as they make this shift? And maybe Tim, you could share a little bit about the types of services you need, maybe a little bit why you chose Syntel as a partner to sort of drive this cloud transformation.
Sure. So we've already had in our environment a lot of software as a service. So when we started looking at cloud in general to migrate the rest of the workloads in our environment, we had a gap in our knowledge of capabilities in Amazon and Azure and other cloud platforms out there. So with Syntel being already a partner for us for our database administration, middleware administration, and IT operations, it only was a natural extension for us that their teams would help us with our cloud journey. And so what we looked for in them was the experience that they had both in the healthcare domain and their public domain offerings. And they were able to demonstrate solid cloud capabilities in their practice and had deep domain expertise coupled with their long existing relationship made us feel comfortable that they were the partner for our cloud journey.
Okay, and what kind of tangible or even intangible business outcomes are you seeing, and are these meeting up with your expectations, or are they shifting all the time? Because it's like when you go into an engagement, sometimes it's like choosing a service partner. It's like an employee. Sometimes you don't if you give them a review every year, the goals aren't always the same, the outcomes aren't always the same. So can you maybe share a bit about what defines success, and has that changed since you went into the relationship?
It did change. I think our approach was, do we survey the landscape that we have here in our environment first and do a discovery? That was sort of the first activities that we started heading down. But then eventually, we realized that that's a significant investment, and it's going to take a lot of time. And we wanted to get a better understanding of what our current pain points are and how they run an environment. So we shifted our strategy there a little bit to take one of our key core systems and focus on that and understanding how that would run in the cloud environment. And the resources we had were able to keep lockstep with us and shift to that approach, and have been able to help us with our pilot and helping us understand this is how this workload translates to run into the cloud environment, and then this is what we're going to need going forward to support that. We're in the middle of that. We're probably about 30% of the way in, but it's going well, and we have some footprint set up in Amazon right now and parts of the environment running, and then we're looking forward to addressing the rest of the activities we've defined so far.
Thanks, Tim. And as we look at this kind of hyper cloud environment, how is this changing? Are we seeing some interesting trends happening amongst these hyper cloud players? Ollie, maybe you'd like to kick this one off?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, we've just produced a piece of research on that exact topic. So I think that when we first started covering those, the kind of the big three players, so Microsoft, AWS, and Google, a year or so ago, they were kind of clear winners. AWS was taking the field. It's one of the fastest growing cloud providers. But this year, I think the most interesting part for us is the rise of Google. So we're seeing more organizations partner up with Google. And actually, I think one of the stories we've heard an awful lot from enterprises is that perhaps they're less keen to work with AWS because it's a potential competitor. I mean, that's particularly the case in retail, and these weren't conversations that were being had last year or even 2 or 3 years ago, because the options weren't as clearly defined. The demand for a huge amount of processing power wasn't as kind of acute as it is now. Organizations are really planning ahead with making sure they've got the right cloud partners to help them scale, to help them kind of put all the technology pieces together that they need to kind of reach that OneOffice utopia that we spend a lot of time talking about. And I think the big part here is how some of these organizations are kind of pivoting their approach and differentiating. So if we just look at from the top level, AWS has this kind of knack for communicating well with the kind of the techie communities. The tech guys that I used to spend a lot of time working with as an IT services professional, AWS was kind of the go-to platform. Whereas now we're hearing a lot about Google Analytics and Google Cloud as the platform for automation and kind of digital engagements like that. Whereas Microsoft tends to be the CFO's friend. A lot of organizations have enterprise licenses that means they could get a good deal with Microsoft. And as all of these hyperscale providers start moving further apart in different directions, I think the likelihood is that the conversation we're having now around multi-cloud moves away from should we, shouldn't we, to we have to. If we want to embrace all of the kind of these best in breed technologies, we're going to need a little bit of all of them. I think that makes it an interesting space to watch at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. It's most interesting. So looking at this future of cloud, and maybe Ashok, from your perspective, you're providing these services. There's so much innovation going on in this space, especially with automation. So what's the picture starting to look like from your perspective?
Yep, and I think Ollie kind of touched on, I think some dimension around how the landscape is changing. But if you look at it deeper inside, I think there are two broad fronts that I would say innovation is driven in cloud today. I think first one probably which is incremental is the efficiency game. Who has scale, who has better connectivity, who has better integration, who has more partners. I think that kind of becomes the efficiency game. Automation plays a lot of that space. I think the second dimension is where it becomes very intriguing. I think this is what I would call the capability side, right? Defining what used to be cloud, right? I think cloud used to be servers, cloud used to be connectivity, it used to be some sort of technology. But now if you really look at it, I think what's really fundamentally changing is you see a lot of data getting into cloud, AI kind of thriving on top of data, a lot of edge services in terms of IoT coming in that feeds into the data, goes back to AI. There are a lot of serverless functions that are coming in, which gives you a lot of unique capabilities. What used to be monolithic SaaS again kind of pivots towards the serverless functions. So if you really look at it, cloud has kind of emerged now as a platform of functions, and it kind of becomes a true ecosystem across not just a single enterprise, but could potentially become de facto digital platform across all businesses. So that's the space that we're closely watching and kind of becomes very interesting, across even inter-enterprise transformation.
Thanks, Ashok. And maybe Jamie, I think in your last blueprint report, you pulled out a lot of the trends of infrastructure and applications really blurring in the enterprise. Do you see this trend really continuing?
Yeah, Phil. Thanks. So we're just actually going through the kind of the same process at the moment, and really we're seeing, if anything, the trends doubling down. And I mean, Ashok mentioned it there slightly, and Ollie mentioned it as well. Is we're kind of seeing at the moment a shift in the cloud technology itself. So we're looking to more kind of application focused. We're looking to more business focus on the the development side. So we're seeing less interest in kind of the standalone infrastructure play, and so that's when people are sort of looking to make plans around kind of infrastructure management. Although the horizontal piece does enter into it, we're seeing from a from an outsourcing perspective, people either looking to kind of push those things together. So looking at it from a from a platform play. So piecing together a DevOps platform where the enterprise basically has a kind of a development sandbox, and again, it's not completely without drag, but a dragless or touchless kind of production switch. So they go from the sandbox environment much more to production and scale much more easily. So those are kind of the things that we've seen. And certainly if you look at the contracts announcements over the last the last 18 months, we've seen many more people actually looking to put the infrastructure work with the applications at that kind of horizontal level. But we're also seeing opportunities around specific solutions that kind of I mean, I hate to use the word vertical, but kind of cut vertical. So they're looking at it much more from that sole application. So you're seeing kind of serverless, but also containerized infrastructure and applications work kind of coming together. So yeah, so we're seeing it, but it's if anything, it's doubling down, and it's going towards that kind of that platform-based IT that I think some of the other speakers have talked about.
Excellent. Thank you, Jamie. And I think we've got some questions coming in from the audience, and Tim, someone's asked around decommissioning strategy for on-premise solutions. Sometimes this isn't the core competency for service providers and definitely the cloud providers. So how do you go about that? Do you have something that is very planned and deliberate, or are you still trying to figure out where to go with that?
I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and we'll have to figure that out as we migrate in each system as we assess them, right? Whether it's a hybrid configuration or completely move to the cloud. And as we approach systems, are we going to re-architect and re-implement them, or are they going to be all as much as possible as a service, right? And then that forces us then to decommission what we have on premise. There's all kinds of things that go along with that, with the data in those systems and how we migrate that. But I really think it's going to be a case-by-case basis as we move forward.
Thanks, thanks, Tim. And you know, Ashok, and I had a couple of questions that have come in quite aligned with this about enterprise clients trying to take more control of the cloud from their own perspective. And what are you seeing in this with this trend, and how do you work with this from a Syntel perspective?
Great question. I think we've all had our pangs of separation anxiety when you don't see your data center, what happens. And such where we're seeing some of these concepts of taking control command. Broadly, if you look at it, we're kind of implementing it in two dimensions. I think one, which is absolutely essential short term, is the business continuity side of it. So if you really look at it, how do you design it for availability, leveraging multi-cloud? How do you define for fault tolerance in terms of the cloud provider? Or how do you define in terms of security? So it essentially means you don't control your data center, so plan for scenarios where that unseen data center or cloud is going to go down, and how does your business survive? So that's the first set of design patterns that we look at from a business continuity perspective. Second dimension, where we're helping clients on take control, and a lot of questions come from clients as well, is around the vendor lock-in. So this is where, if you really look at benefits of cloud that are getting in, so the more you get into PaaS functions, the more you're locked in. And this is not new to cloud. It started with getting stuck with a database provider, getting stuck with runtime environment. So it's kind of an extension to it. So where a lot of clients are seeing and where they're designing applications and infrastructure, is to really look at containerization to see, can you use technology to move your application seamlessly across multiple clouds without too much of a lock-in. And we call this app virtualization, so that the application or the workload that runs is kind of independent of the cloud. And second kind of fallback mechanism is, are there open source runtimes? So I think that's where we've seen, Pivotal score very well on the Cloud Foundry platform. We have seen OpenShift and OpenStack come out very well. Where there is a kind of a security that says, hey, there is an open source alternative if things don't work so well with a specific provider. End of the day, Phil, I think a lot of it is a trade-off on what's the speed you need, what's the price point, and what risk are we willing to take. So that's kind of defines the design template.
Okay, thanks, Ashok. And as we look at when cloud kind of hit us in about the 2010 timeframe, I think it was, the hype around it was tremendous, but the speed to move to it seemed to be a little more painful. And then we got sidetracked by the smack stack, IoT, digital, automation, AI. So Ollie, you like this one. Is the cloud hype over, or are we seeing something new emerge here? What's your perspective?
No, so yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, hype is too positive and cheerful for somebody as cynical as me. So I avoid hype where possible. But I think, I think it never really went away. So I was an IT services professional in a public sector organization when cloud suddenly became, the must-have thing, and there was a huge amount of fear at the time. Is it safe? Is it secure? And we've kind of got over a lot of those hurdles, and I think it's going to come back with a vengeance. I think it's going to be all about the cloud as we move to digital, as organizations start talking about these really exciting hype-worthy technologies like blockchain, IoT, automation. They're all process heavy, they're all storage heavy, and you need cloud. So it'll be hype, but it'll be the right type of hype. It'll be the type of hype that drives results. You know, we're excited about cloud because we need it to get where we need to be, rather than you know, we're doing it because we don't want to run on premise anymore, which was the conversations we're having 5-10 years ago. Now the kind of the proof of what cloud can do to an organization in terms of scalability and agility is there. So it's hype, but it's the right type of hype. But I don't think it ever went anywhere to begin with, to be honest. I think most of us IT guys have always been relatively excited.
That's a very good answer. Relatively excited. That's probably the best way to describe everything we're seeing right now. But it's like I remember covering e-commerce as an analyst back in about '98, and everything we were predicting back then happened, but it took about 15 years, not 5 years. But I think with cloud, it's happening probably in a more constricted timescale than that. So, you know, I'm conscious of time here, and I would love to get everybody to chime in with some of their final thoughts about the future of cloud and what it's going to hold from each person's perspective. So maybe Ashok, you can sum up from a service provider perspective. What do you think the future is going to hold for someone like Syntel? What do you think we'll be talking about in a couple of years' time?
I think all of us kind of agreed on a pattern. I think what we're seeing essentially is cloud will become the default digital business platform, and you correctly put it. It's going to be underbelly, and Ollie explained that, you know, data is so vast, only the cloud can take it. Processing is going to be in cycles. So cloud kind of becomes the default platform. And with that imperative in mind, I think all of us service providers will need to adapt to it, given that's the reality. So we're really looking at it from 4 dimensions. I think first is the culture part. I think where it used to be traditionally waterfall, how can we and our customers kind of look at speed to market and get into a DevOps mindset. Second dimension, in terms of what's really changing for us, is the skill side. So if you historically look at it, maybe we've come a full cycle back to the mainframe days where IBM used to run operations and we used to do the applications. So now cloud is the operations or the infrastructure as a full stack, and we really need developers who are full stack, who would kind of do everything from all stacks of the application. Third dimension is a new set of partnerships with frenemies concept. So there is multi-cloud integration between clouds, but there are preferences for clouds. It's an exciting time that way. And the last dimension is the pricing model. So I think everything is moving towards as a service, where all of us providers are kind of aligning to that model as well. But it's essentially most exciting time in decades because every business has to go digital, and today technology is the business, and we're all really looking forward to the transformation.
Excellent. And Jamie Snowden, you've been analyzing this space for about 20 years. Sorry to reveal that to everybody, but 2 to 3 years. What conversation are we going to be having about the cloud?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most interesting thing that I've picked up the last 18 months, which generally means that's probably what we're going to be talking about the next couple of years, really, and that is a distinct change, and you sort of alluded to it in your introduction, was a distinct change in the language around business operations, and I'm detecting a kind of an acceptance of technology and sort of IT initiatives, not just from obviously the IT departments and kind of digital businesses within large organizations. We're also seeing that language and so partly the terminology of IT and technology. So talking about things as hybrid, but also talking about platforms, and there's that kind of merger of you know, it's almost the kind of, you know, something that as analysts we've probably been talking about for quite a long time, and it's probably the most exciting thing, is that kind of, not the merger of business and IT, but having that kind of that seamless relationship between business and IT. And I think, you know, cloud is starting to enable that, but it's also kind of, you know, with the language kind of sinking into the way you know, sort of operational leaders are talking about kind of both IT, but also the way they operate their business. I think that's going to be the big change. So it's not so much about, you know, because we could talk about, you know, serverless technology, we could talk about, you know, the things that are happening in cloud itself to make it kind of easier to consume, and you know, and virtualizing organizations, you know, better, and so virtualizing the compute, but also virtualizing the processes within an organization. And those things are obviously, you know, really important, and the way those technologies are working and the way that they're supporting kind of, you know, the change agents of IT, that's obviously very key. But really it's about that kind of that shift in language and that bringing of IT and business closer together. And, you know, once you know, cloud, but kind of the IT department takes on that kind of that platform enablement role, and it's able to then kind of translate this kind of this IT terminology into business, and business users could then kind of, you know, make decisions, you know, in a native environment, I suppose, a native business environment rather than a native IT environment. Then I think that's really where the big shift's happening, and we're certainly seeing the kind of you know, some of that going on, but I think that's going to accelerate, and that's going to be probably one of the big things that we'll see, sort of that genuine business and IT alignment.
Okay, good. And then certainly last but not least, Tim, you look out into your journey, where you've come from, you know, the partners that got you here, and maybe the partners who are going to take you into the future. You know, what conversations do you think we'd be having in a couple of years' time?
I think it's going to be more of what was just kind of discussed. You know, we've already adopted a cloud-first strategy, so that anything new in our environment, we look at it as what can we set up in the cloud first, or as we upgrade, redeploy that to the cloud. So going forward, culturally, the abilities and understand what our role is going forward, and also protecting the information that's there. You know, I think we'll be many more systems migrated to the cloud in 2 to 3 years than we have now, in some hybrid configuration, maybe in 5 to 10 years, 100%.
Wow. Okay, and I think this hybrid configuration is definitely the shift we're making, and it's fascinating that everything we're talking about in 2010 is now happening, you know, at a quite an advanced stage. So this has been a great conversation, thinking about the hypercloud, the scale that we have to move at. So I'd like to thank Ashok Balasubramanian at Syntel, the head of services transformation, Timothy Jenkins from Independent Health. Thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy guy, so we appreciate you sharing your insights today. Jamie Snowden and Ollie O'Donoghue from HfS, good insights as well, chaps. Really enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyable conversation, and I've really enjoyed this sort of discussion around where the cloud is going. So we'll put a replay of this on hfsresearch.com in the next couple of days, and you can download the slides as well. And I do appreciate everybody spending their afternoon with us. So thank you very much.